get to a point where you go through different stages of calm abiding. So I'm just going to describe those really shortly. So you start by doing a practice on focusing on the breath. There's a specific technique on how to focus on the breath, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of the technique. You could learn that, I'll do another Intro to Calm Abiding meditation course in the fall at some point, or in the Walking the Path program if you decided to join that. So anyway, you do a practice for focusing on the breath, and that is not a so-called main practice. That is what we call an antidote practice. So it's kind of like a tool in your toolkit that you're going to use later all the way through your whole path. But in the beginning, you have to train to get used to using that tool, or else it's not going to be a useful tool. If you don't know how to use it, let's say you're on a work site and someone gave you a brand new fancy tool and you're excited about the new tool, but you actually don't know how to use it. When you're out there on the work site, that tool is not useful to you. So in the same way, you have to train with this breath practice in the beginning. So we have people just do this for a few days or a week or something like that, just to get used to it enough that it's going to be a useful tool down the road. And it's literally referred to as the antidote to thinking. And what that means is, let's say you're doing the so-called main practices, which in this I'm going to explain in a second. You're focusing initially on an external object, and by focusing on the external object, you're working with that, but from time to time your mind just won't sit still, and you can't really get settled. So at that moment, you use the breath practice as a so-called antidote to thought. You have that tool in your toolkit and you pull it out for that moment. So that helps you calm down and kind of center and make your energy kind of calm to the point where you're ready to go back into the so-called main practice of focusing on the object. So in this program, we have people go through a few days of doing that practice, and then they move on to an external object. And in this Walking the Path program, just to give a little bit of overview of the way some of the programs in Namchak work, we have some programs that are a little bit more, we use an example of a funnel. They're kind of the top of the funnel, meaning that they're kind of open to anyone who might be interested in any kind of mindfulness and meditation. And there are some programs that are a little bit more specifically Buddhist as you might come down the funnel. And so the Walking the Path program is getting pretty close to the bottom of the funnel. Even if you moved into the second year of the Walking the Path, which is the insight section, you actually can't go into that section unless you are ready to formally become a Buddhist. There's like a ceremony, like a ritual of taking what's called taking refuge or going for refuge. So anyway, my point is that when we use an external object in the top of the funnel programs, we use a more neutral object. It's just a kind of a random image. Or you could use a stick or a rock or anything. You could use a spot on the wall. In this program, we use a picture of the Buddha. It's not this picture. I have another picture that I give to students. And it's not just a random picture. It's a picture of the statue of the Buddha that is in Bodh Gaya in India, the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment. And that picture is consecrated by one of our lamas. So it's like, it's kind of like a holy object of sorts, you could say. So anyway, you focus on that picture in various ways, sometimes on the entire body, sometimes at the point. There's a point in the middle of the Buddha's forehead. You'll see on pictures of the Buddha, some people call it the third eye. It's not exactly that, but anyway, there's a spot there that you could focus on, a spot at the very top of the crown of his head, a spot at his throat, a spot at his heart. And so you focus in different ways for different prescribed periods of time. We give people a calendar of going through this. So anyway, by the end of 6 months, people are usually pretty stabilized. They can do something like 10 minutes of fairly undistracted calm abiding, or even more, hopefully more, more like 10 to 15, something like that. Not everyone gets there, and that's okay, and you can still move on, but that's kind of the goal, is to get somewhere in that range. And that also just depends on everyone's level of enthusiasm, how much practice they put in every day. The next stage is to move to objectless calm abiding. So in the objectless, first you use a visualized object, no longer a physical object. And then after a few months with a visualized object, you drop the object altogether and go to completely unsupported, no object calm abiding. So at that point, you don't need anything to meditate anymore. You don't need a picture, you don't need anything. You can just sit and hopefully just be able to tap into that kind of attentive, concentrated awareness. Then so we've done now 1 full year, so 6 months with an object, 6 months with half using kind of a visualized object and half using no object. Then we move into the insight section. So in the ideal world, by the time you get to the insight section, you would be able to sit undistracted. And when I say undistracted, I don't mean that there's no thoughts in your mind at all. That's not going to happen for most people. It'll only happen sometimes in little kind of flashes of meditative experiences or something like that. But by and large, undistracted, meaning that you didn't forget that you were meditating, that you got so caught up in thoughts that you forgot what you were doing. So there are still going to be thoughts coming up kind of peripherally, and you kind of notice them and recenter, notice them and recenter. But if you get fully lost in thought, that's what we would count more as like full-blown distraction. So like we're shooting for being able to, maybe not every time, but like fairly consistently being able to sit for 10, 15, even 20 minutes without falling into that full-blown distraction before moving into Vipassana. And we're not like super strict about that, but that's the ideal. That's kind of like what would be an ideal kind of support for being able to go into Vipassana. So then, that's kind of calm abiding in a nutshell, is like that's how you would do it. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of the instruction. There's way more to it than that, and we don't have time for that tonight. But just to give an overview of what that's going to do is like, so imagine that your mind is like an unfocused flashlight. It's just the beam is completely dispersed. It's shining on everything. So in the same way, like our minds just want to go after everything. Like they want to jump towards every thought. They want to think about everything that we see and think and hear. And we're fully habituated to just letting our mind go. And what we're doing is like focusing in, like twisting that dial on the flashlight and getting our attention really narrowed in that we can keep all the power. Imagine that our power of our mind is 100%, and right now it's 100% like dispersed everywhere. And we're working towards getting more and more of that percent focused in on a single point. And then once you get focused in on a single point, then we kind of allow that 100% to be maybe a little bit more softly focused but still focused when you're using a visualized object. And then even more softly focused but still focused when you use no object. And what I mean by softly focused is that it doesn't require as much tension in your mind. At the beginning, if you're not holding kind of tight with concentration, then the meditative object just slips away. You slip right back into thinking. But as you go further and further, it requires less and less tension in your mind to hold yourself or to kind of maintain that state of calm abiding or focused concentration. So anyway, that's what we're working towards, is going from like full-blown scattered mind to focused but softer mind, maybe something like that.